Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai. That's giving all praises, honor, and glory to the Most High God, whose name is Yahweh. Ba'ashem meaning coming in the name of, and Yahweh Shai, who the world calls Jesus Christ. Gusano, I'm from the dirt, and I remember where I'm from. I'm back with another lesson for this six-part series on Israel, a Lost Heritage. We are on part 6, and today we are going to go over the Atlantic slave trade and 1619. Without further ado, let's get into it, family. Israel, a Lost Heritage, part 6, the Trans-Atlantic Slave Trade, 1619. So we know that the natives went into captivity, right? But this wasn't all, right? We got brothers that came from Africa, right? Kind of like we did. If you follow the series, they came from the other side of the world while we were already in America, right? Slavery of Africans before 1619, right? The 1400s and the 1500s. Long before 1619, Africans were already being taken into slavery by Europeans. Portuguese slave trade, 1400s. In the 1400s, Portuguese explorers began capturing West Africans and transporting them to Europe. By 1500, tens of thousands of Africans had been enslaved in Portugal and Spain. This is historically documented by scholars such as historian John Thornton in Africa and Africans in the Making of the Atlantic World. Portugal became the first major European slave trading nation, right? So it started way before 1619, but 1619 was a turning point, right? That's why I titled it like that. Columbus and early slave exchanges, 1490s. Christopher Columbus played a major role in early slave movement between the Americas, Europe, and Africa. After arriving in the Caribbean in 1492, Columbus enslaved thousands of Taino Indians. In 1495, he shipped about 500 Taino captives to Spain. Spanish colonies quickly began importing Africans because indigenous populations were dying from disease and exploitation. So, they mistreated the Tainos so bad that now they were dying off, and now they needed slaves to, continue digging for gold. So they went and, brought some Africans over. By the early 1500s, Africans were already present in the Americas. Indigenous people were already enslaved, and a transatlantic slave system was forming. Africans in the Americas before 1619. Africans were present in Spanish territories decades before English colonies. They were recorded in Hispaniola, which is now the Dominican Republic in Haiti, in 1501. They were brought to South Carolina during a failed Spanish colony in 1526. They were present in St. Augustine, Florida, first permanent European settlement in the U.S. in 1565. So slavery in America did not start in 1619, right? But why is 1619 so important, right? 1619 marks a major turning point. In 1619, a ship called the White Lion brought about 20 Africans to Jamestown. They were traded for supplies in the English colony of Virginia Colony. This event is often called the beginning of African slavery in English North America, the symbolic start of African American slavery history. But slavery already existed for over 100 years before this. The true peak of the transatlantic slave trade and the largest volume of Africans transported occurred during the 1600s through the 1800s, with the peak century being the 1700s. Historians estimate that about 12.5 million Africans were shipped across the Atlantic, and about 10.7 million survived the journey. So imagine that. About 2 million died during that journey. Scholars such as David Eltis, Transatlantic Slave Trade Database, confirm these numbers. Slavery on ships, biblical prophecy. Deuteronomy 28:68 said, "And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships." Egypt in prophecy, right? Egypt means bondage. Historical fulfillment. Africans were transported across the Atlantic in slave ships, packed tightly, chained, lying in human waste. Mortality rates reach 15 to 25%. This event is known as the Middle Passage. No other group in history fulfills this curse on the same scale as our brothers from the tribe of Judah. Look at this. Yokes of iron, prophecy fulfilled. Deuteronomy 28:48. He shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck. Historical reality, right? Iron collars, shackles, chains, neck restraints used during transport and punishment. Images and artifacts exist in museums worldwide confirming this. Look at this Judite brother with a yoke of iron on his neck. Look at the sign, to be sold, right? You shall be sold unto your enemies. Look at this, man. He's shackled, feet, hands, and a yoke of iron on his neck. Sons and daughters sold, prophecy fulfilled. Deuteronomy 28:41. Thou shalt beget sons and daughters, but thou shalt not enjoy them. Enslaved families were separated constantly, right? Documented facts. Children sold away from parents. Spouses separated permanently. Slave auctions treated humans as property. This is one of the most well-recorded aspects of American slavery. Look, yokes of iron on the necks. Look at the children. Even the children had to be punished. And it wasn't just, we just gonna tie you up and just come with us. No, this was harsh punishment, man. This is what our people went through. Labor without enjoyment, prophecy fulfilled. Deuteronomy 28:33. The fruit of thy hand, Slaki, the fruit of thy land shall a nation which thou knowest not eat up. Enslaved Africans built plantations, infrastructure, wealth of America and Europe, yet received no wages, no ownership, no inheritance. Economists confirm slave labor generated enormous wealth for Western nations. Loss of heritage, prophecy fulfilled. Deuteronomy 28:37. Thou shalt become an astonishment, a byword. Deuteronomy 28:64. You're going to serve other gods. Psalm 83:4. Let the name of Israel be no more in remembrance. So now we call ourselves blacks or Puerto Ricans, right? Which is rich port and a color from a crayon box. We are not those things. I'm not rich and I'm not a port. You can't park a boat on my back. So why would I be called a rich port? My brothers from Judah are different shades of brown, right? Melanin. No one's black. So why do we identify like this? Because the enemies wanted the name of Israel to be no more in remembrance. This is why they took our language so that we couldn't talk to our children in our language, or we would suffer consequences, right? Made examples of, like the Judite brother with the scars on his back that I just showed. We lost our heritage. Slave system actions, tribal identities erased, names replaced with European names. Now, instead of Judah, you have names like Johnson, Williams, right? Religion forced upon slaves. They gave us, the Bible, but we didn't speak English or Spanish, so we didn't know what that book was. They were telling us whatever they were telling us in their language. We can't understand what they're saying to us until we did learn. Then we learned a whole new doctrine, right? So it was our story, but they gave us a doctrine. Cultural memory destroyed. We were taught you couldn't read, right? Don't read because you'll be punished. We couldn't teach our children to read. We couldn't do anything, right? So we lost our culture, our languages, right? This matches biblical warnings exactly. Enemies would enslave them. Deuteronomy 28 and 68. You shall be sold unto your enemies, right? Like the Judite brother with the yoke of iron on his neck, he had a sign behind him to be sold. Israel's enemies historically included European slave traders, colonial empires, and slave owners. Historical iron neck collars and chains, archaeological museums contain slave shackles, iron collars with spikes, branding irons, auction records. That's crazy, branding irons. We were branded like stock, like animals. These are physical proofs of the curse. Connection to indigenous slavery, Taino. The same colonial system enslaved Africans, indigenous Americans, Taino, Arawak, etc. Columbus initiated a pattern of indigenous slavery first and African replacement labor later. America built on slave labor. Historians confirm slave labor built agriculture economy, the cotton industry, banking wealth, and trade empires. Scholar Edward Baptist documents how slavery fueled American capitalism. Why this matters biblically. Deuteronomy 28 describes a specific people who would experience captivity, ships, iron yokes, family separation, cultural destruction, oppression worldwide. The transatlantic slave trade matches these conditions uniquely. Here's a timeline from the 1400s to the 1800s of this slave trade. Portuguese begin African slave trade in the 1400s. Columbus enslaves indigenous people and Africans enter Americas in the 1490s. Africans in Spanish colonies by the 1500s. Africans arrive in English Virginia in 1619. The peak of the slave trade, 1700s, and slavery expands across America in the 1800s. The transatlantic slave trade can be interpreted as fulfillment of covenant curses described in Deuteronomy for disobedience. It is one of the largest forced migrations and systems of oppression ever recorded. So-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Indians, we are the 12 tribes of Israel. We need to come back to our culture, come back to our heritage, come back to our covenant, come back to our God and the laws that he gave us. We must repent and be converted and follow the laws of the Most High God so that we can receive the blessings of Deuteronomy and no longer receive the curses. I hope somebody was edified during the duration of this video. Here at Children of the Covenant, we only seek to edify the people. We want our people to turn back to the Most High God. And with that, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai. That's giving all praises, honor, and glory to the Most High God, whose name is Yahweh. Ba'ashem meaning coming in the name of, and Yahweh Shai, who the world calls Jesus Christ. Shalom, and I love y'all.